Hey guys, Sleepy Reader here with a small little haul video, in-stocks trades haul, and a few things I picked up today at a shop I don't normally go to. First, leading with the most exciting thing, so you can stop watching this video after I show you Jodorowsky and Moebius's The Incal. It's a pretty chunky hardback collection of the I believe it's seven graphic novels or graphic albums that make up the original Incal series, written by Jodorowsky, who is this famous avant-garde movie director from Mexico, who was living in Paris, I think, and drawn by Moebius, the legendary French comic book artist, one of the founders of metal hurlant, and perhaps I feel pretty strongly, especially just flipping through this book, perhaps one of the most influential artists on all the indie kind of comic work that we see now here in the United States, even though it's very hard to find his published work in the United States. I didn't even know the existence of this collection until recently alerted by, I want to say I was alerted both by Gore Vidal and by Christina Ayarte, but I could be wrong. I know that Christina alerted me to it. I think Gore Vidal did too. But in any case, you don't see this in comic book stores very often. You'd think it should be front and center. In a way, it feels like Moebius deserves a spot in his influence over our comic book industry, along with Will Eisner and Jack Kirby. And so it's just sort of funny how invisible he is, even though we're reading and looking at comic books that are so influenced by what he has done. Even the coloring, I'm assuming this is the original coloring, is so different than what was being done in American comics at the time this was published. I believe this was published like maybe 81 through 87 or 88. And of course, Moebius had already done some pretty influential work before this, which Americans were seeing in heavy metal at the time, but now is pretty hard to find. And The Fifth Essence makes me think of The Fifth Element, a movie which was probably very influenced by this too. In the introduction, which is by Brian Michael Bendis, he claims that basically every artist or writer working in visual medium who's ever read this has ended up ripping off some part of it. I assume he includes himself in that. And he claims whole sequences in movies have been drawn right out of these pages. So I think I must have read the first small section. I feel like maybe it was reprinted in Epic Comics at the time, but it might have been heavy metal. But I recognize the early pages, but the rest of it I've never read, and it was so long ago that I read these. I'll be really excited to read this. Maybe if I have time, I'll do little thoughts as I read each chapter, collect those or something for a video. So that's my most exciting new thing to add to my to-be-read pile, and I think it'll go near the top of the to-be-read pile. In the same in-stock trades purchase, I got the hardback of the recent New Adventures of Little Nemo, done by Eric Schanauer and the great artist Gabriel Rodriguez. I've already bought the individual issues, but this is a bit oversized, and when I really love the art and everything, I want it oversized. I want it hardback. There's also a paperback out of this, which is undersized, a little smaller than the original comics. So if you can afford it and you're interested in this, I would definitely say get the hardback in this case. I love these hardbacks that don't have dust jackets and just have the image right on the book, which is true for the third hardback I got in my in-stock trades package, which is the creepy and eerie comics work of Alex Toth. I always want to say Toth. Alex Toth. I didn't even know he wrote and drew, I don't think he wrote, for the Warren horror comics. Maybe it was kind of early on. Toth is reputed to be one of the best comic book artists of all time, but somehow remained obscure, but deeply admired by all practitioners of the art, supposedly. He does a lot of interesting work. The black and white aspect is very interesting. So it'd be good in a way to have stuff that he did that was meant to be black and white. We'll see if I start to understand his greatness more. I actually read a whole book about Alex Toth. I did a video on that a long time ago. And while I appreciated the idea of him being a genius, I've yet to really grok fully why he's so great. So I hope to get more out of this. I really love these Dark Horse hardbacks that are devoted to individual artists' work in the old Warren black and whites. They're very high quality hardbacks, and I kind of enjoy revisiting or visiting for the first time stuff from Creepy and Eerie in this format. It's really nice. So today I popped over to this more hip than your usual comic book store called Floating World, which carries a lot of zines. They have a vinyl record section, and they have tons of graphic novels. In fact, they do have the Moebius humanoids graphic novels, which my other comic book stores don't have. It's just kind of hard to get to in a part of downtown Portland that's really hard to park in, and so I just don't go there very often. And of course I don't get my discount there that I do at my nearby comic book store. But I spent more time browsing and planning what to buy there someday in the future, or find online and order cheaper. But they had a ton of these reprints of the classic EC books. Each reprint contains like I guess 4 issues of a given title. So this is Weird Fantasy, and it's like, I'm pretty sure these are not currently in print, but maybe I'm wrong. Although the cover prices are kind of cheap for what they are too. But these feel like they just came off the press. I mean, it's pristine. But I always thought that, they published these in the 80s and 90s and hadn't published these reprints in quite a while. But I thought I'd pick up that. This is a set of Weird Fantasy issues that I do not have already. And then also kind of laying around, which probably is from a while ago, was a $8 sort of mini trade from IDW reprinting some Thunder Agents, Wally Wood's sort of obscure superhero group that gets reprinted or revived every now and then, including at DC Comics. So I wonder who owns the rights to them. I think at DC. I don't know. Anyway, now they're at IDW, and I couldn't resist this cover, which is a kind of tribute to Wally Wood, I think. I don't think it's an actual Wally Wood cover. It says Peepoy After Wood. So I just couldn't resist that. It's not too expensive. I might have some of these stories in other reprints, but it's a nice format to have them in. And then, so I wanted to buy some, more really small press zine kind of comics, and they have a ton of them there, almost none of them with prices on them, and I was flipping through them and I just couldn't decide what to get. And suddenly I noticed off in the corner this huge stack of these very white-looking comics, and they are all Steve Ditko comics that are self-published or published by this woman named Robin Snyder for him, that he's been quietly doing, still doing now, and there was a huge stack. Felt like the store had bought a whole bunch and no one had ever noticed they were there. So I grabbed 3 that looked interesting to me, and I might go back and grab more. I've ordered a few online before, and I got one in a Kickstarter, but I've never seen them in a comic shop before. So instead of buying the regular zines, I bought Steve Ditko zines. Each one was $4, which is a lot more reasonable price than most of what was there. But I read some of this one, which is called Ditko Continued, and almost every story in here is to be continued. I don't know if he actually finishes them in another comic. However, there's one in here that I want to share with you. It's just sort of a one-off double-page thing. Where is it? Now I've lost track. It's near the beginning. Here it is. The Theater of the FF. FF being foolish fans. That's you and me, guys. He did this in 2008, I guess. He's got copyrights all over it. I accuse him of not giving me an autograph, not signing my comic books, not giving interviews. The accuser. Then there's the weeper. He has no mercy, sob. No mercy, sob. He has no pity, sob. No mercy, sob. No feeling. No, sob, guilt. No gratifying my whims, wants, sob. I'm, sob, entitled. Wah, sob, sob. And then there's the pseudo and the sham believer, and then getting his own page is someone called the non-A, who says that fucking Ditko, every time he asks something, he gives a fucking Ditko answer. Can't the bastard stop being himself? Be anybody but goddamn Ditko. Yeah, you tell that fucker, right on. Sorry for the language, but I'm just feeling like that's what Ditko is wanting me to read here. He is angry. There's the stuff that I've managed to read a little bit of today is a lot of him or characters complaining or stating that there's only black and white, there is no gray. People want to be, give excuses for their bad behavior, but there's no excuse. And that's pretty much the only message I've gotten so far from this. But there's something fascinating to me here. It feels like he's just kept drawing and drawing and drawing. He's just a person who draws and makes comics, even though he doesn't try to get anyone to notice them or discover them. I don't even know what the title of this one is. It's number 19, and the title seems to be number 19 with 9 spelled backwards. And then, very interestingly, here's issue 15 of Mr. A from 2014. So he slowly continued Mr. A over all these years. I think some of the material in here might be older stuff that never got printed, and some is newer, if I understand correctly. I'm guessing I don't know. I don't know which is the older and which is the newer. But I'm fascinated. And it's just fascinating, an artist whose name is mentioned so often and is so pivotal. He's not retired. He's out there doing stuff that he's just doing in obscurity. Very obscure obscurity as far as I can tell. Anyway, one last note so Floating World is, kind of has a very different vibe from your average comic book store, although if you go in the back, there's all the regular comics, Marvel, DC, Image, etc. But the front feels very different. But the whole store was very crowded when I went in there, and the weird thing, I know we've all been hearing about this before, but the store was filled with women. I've seen more women at my store, but it's still a large number of men. This store maybe had 1 man in it and 20 women customers, all sort of excitedly looking through their wares. So maybe there'll be a rise up of a different kind of store that appeals, that has a different appeal. This store, maybe it was its location, but I think it's more the vibe at the store is just different. And so the women who've taken an interest in comics recently really enjoy browsing at this store. I found that really interesting. Anyway, talk to you all later. Bye-bye.